And now, for the next session with the topics that may keep you awake at night, it's the session Cyber Vigilance, Getting Ready for Future Cyber Threats. Please join me in welcoming our moderator, Director of Enterprise Risk Management Department at the Bank of Thailand, Ms. วิจิตร เลขามารมครับ
Well, a very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the very last but not least session of the second day events, and actually not the last day because tomorrow we're going to have half day through about the human resources in the digital workspace as well. So I'm truly honored to be moderating this session regarding cybersecurity. So this context is everywhere right now because we've seen a lot of developments in digital solutions. We've heard about new technologies for these 2 whole days. And cybersecurity is always part of it, right? And advancement and the sophisticated technologies probably expose additional risks, especially the cyber one. There are more opportunities for criminals to attack. So how can we make sure that we can safeguard ourselves first and our own organization? There's a quote saying that it's not the matter of if, but it's the matter of when. There are 2 types of organizations. The first one is they've been attacked and they know it. The second one is they've been attacked, but they don't know about it. So we'll make sure that this session can give you some of the awareness, some of the vigilance that we should keep our guard up. So today it's my pleasure and very truly honored to have our 4 distinguished gentlemen here with us to share. And they've been through the exceptional experiences and will give some tips and tricks how to prepare your organization for emerging cyber risk. And another keyword for the session is about cyber resiliency, okay? And the actions that we need to take care of. And I was talking to the panelists about our KPIs after the session, that after the end of the session, we need to get people scared about these cyber attacks, right? Get them to have more awareness, get them to have more vigilance, and don't let your guard down, just like the pandemic happens, okay? So please allow me to introduce. We have the Cyber Risk Advisory specializing in cybersecurity and risk management from Deloitte. Please welcome Mr. Jerry Chen.
Thank you.
And up next, we have the Chief Information Security Officer, or CISO, from Bangkok Bank. And he's also an honorary advisor at Thai Banking Search. Please join me to welcome Dr. Kitti Kosavisit. And the third gentleman we have here in very cute pink blazer here, we have Colin Lowe from Mandiant. Thank you. And Mandiant is a market leader in threat intelligence and the front liers of cybersecurity. And very last but not least here, very honored to have the Deputy Secretary General from the National Cybersecurity Agency, or NCSA. Please join me to welcome Major General Theeravut Withayakon. Thank you once again, all gentlemen, for being here with us on the Bank of Thailand stage. So let's get started with Jerry to show up all the big picture, the environmental scan, that the changes of the behavior of customers and also the way of working, especially after this pandemic. What are you seeing in the global perspective, and what are those changes, and how would that affect the cybersecurity?
Thanks. First and foremost, I would like to thank the Bank of Thailand for inviting us to share our thoughts on this very important topic. So I think as we start looking at the changes over the last several years after COVID, it has really accelerated this whole digitalization, which was already happening many years ago, but then it really forced it to really go a lot faster. So it's really resulted in behavioral change, both at the enterprises as well as the consumers. So as you start looking at the whole landscape, first and foremost, if you look at consumers, they have been now exposed to very much more digital ways of transacting with businesses and banks, but a lot of them may not be very well aware about the risks of what can happen. If we look at some of the examples that I've come across, we have seen that there were some consumers who made some complaints about services on company's Twitter page itself. And you see that the hackers actually were monitoring those feeds, and they contacted the consumers who made the complaint even faster than before the company contacted the customer. And this is where you see, hackers hijacking some of these digital means that companies have been putting up. From an enterprise perspective, there are also a lot of challenges, right? Because over the last 2 to 3 years, we have had a lot of new infrastructure that's being built up to support this hybrid and remote working. And most of us are now in a stage where we have this hybrid way where some workforce will still continue working from home, some will come back to the office. And one of the key questions is, how can you be so sure that, number one, the infrastructure that you have changed in the last 2 to 3 years are resilient enough, cyber resilient enough? How do you know that these devices that have been outside of your organization for the last 3 years, now when they're coming back, are they safe? So I think there are those challenges which is there, and it's never an easy balance, right? Because on the one hand, you want to put security in the way that you operate and do business, but yet you do not want to overdo it, because when there's too much friction, your customers will just go somewhere else. So I think there is a lot of emerging things which are happening, and it's really putting a lot of pressures for both consumers as well as businesses to really adapt very quickly to it.
Well, thanks so much, Jerry. That's interesting because we are one of the players as well in this kind of like a whole ecosystem, right? So when you talk about the global perspective, let's go deep dive a little bit into the front layer for the Mandiant that Colin is working his days in and days out of the cyber attack. So what are you seeing on the current situation of cyber threats, and what would be the cybersecurity landscape for this whole thing?
Sure. Thank you. So I think with what Jerry just shared on the threats, on the threat front, we're actually seeing a lot more when it comes to things like ransomware. Out of what Mandiant actually have when we do our security investigation, cyber breaches, at least in APAC, we are seeing 1 out of 4, incidents that we respond to is all ransomware. Phishing attacks, even spear phishing, business email compromises. These are all the threats that we are kind of seeing for the past years. But ransomware is one of those areas that we are seeing a huge evolution. In a way, even down to how ransomware is being conducted, the different kind of schemes behind it. So those are things that we are seeing moving and trending and emerging. And on the front, of course, this front itself, the other concerns is, the denominator across all this is always about human being. Human is always kind of the weakest link. You can put a lot of technologies, the controls can be there. These are static things. These work as per what you actually configured them to be. But moving forward, attackers really attack on the fact that humans might slip on some of these vigilance. Humans beings might also be thinking about something that will benefit them, in terms of greed, for example. Those are things that they will take and then click on links as simple as that, or even just download stuff without realizing that that might be the cause of a breach that's going to happen. So, of course, when you start breaking those things down, 2 other areas that we need to think about, is, with the transformation, how things are moving, digital transformation, where is your data sitting? Is your data sitting at somewhere outside? Is it internally? So the concepts of data in transit, data at rest, data in use will still come back to haunt us. How do you govern that?
To keep you awake at night.
That's right, And then the next thing, when you start actually opening up, especially with, let's say, all your blockchain technologies, the finance world, for example, you probably need to think about who is the person behind the computer. Even for remote workforce that Jerry shared, who is really behind it? Is it really your employee? You need to think about. So identity is another area that we really need to think about and make sure that we put some effort and emphasis on. Then, of course, I would say that over time, we have seen within the past 2 years, supply chain. Those are one of those key things that attackers would actually attack once, but impact many. So the force multiplier behind it is very massive. We need to think about how do we secure things like supply chain risk.
Yeah, we'll go through the responsive manner later. So you mentioned about the new technologies like what we've heard this morning about digital assets, Web 3.0 or CBDC. Would those new technologies expose higher risk, especially the cyberspace?
Definitely, well, with new technologies, you do not know exactly what's behind these technologies, right? The things like all your application libraries, how do you assure yourself that whatever technologies you put in place is based on, honestly, the assumptions that the supplier tells you, or if not, your vendors tells you. The whole risk is how do you assure that and how do you wrap that around? You need to think about whether are you taking it from a trusted source, even down to replacing the small little parts that comes from vendors. These are things you need to think about and rethink. In fact, in the new world itself, as we start thinking about going digital, going to the cloud, all this presents risk. But it's always taking a curated or moderated risk posture or thinking around how do we even get the fundamentals all set up right and revisit these foundations again.
Yeah, thank you so much, Colin, for that, because when you mentioned about the identity, one of the quotes from the TB Cert booth downstairs, if anyone interested, you can visit their booth there. One of the quotes over there is saying that the professional attacks organization. No, amateur attackers attack organization, but professional attackers attack people, because we're so prone of risks here, and we probably not have much of the guard. So when we see about the global perspective here, let's come down to what Thailand is doing. We'll talk to the Major General about the Thailand's perspective on the NCSA as being the lead regulator in the cybersecurity. You probably see a lot of cybersecurity journey in Thailand. So can you please share with us your view on that? What's the different levels of development of different sectors, different organizations in Thailand?
Thank you. Before I get to the statistic of the cyber threat in Thailand, let me talk about the characteristic of cyber threats. As we know, cyber issue is the global threat. It's encompassed beyond the international boundaries. And when it happens in one corner of the world, it can happen at the other corner simultaneously. Because of that, because of these characteristics, the statistic of cyber threat or the trend of cyber threat between global and Thailand go to the similar directions. Because of this, but it might be slightly different because depend on each particular country context. For example, Thailand, we are leading in terms of banking usage. So therefore, we have slightly higher number of attacks for financial scam. But what is the most important to cope with this issue is that NCSA, we focus on cooperations because, for example, in the United Kingdoms, they use the whole society approach to solve with these cyber issues. Similarly to Thailand, NCSA will act as the main cooperators, both domestically and internationally, in order to improve cyber resiliency as a whole for the nations.
Thank you so much. You mentioned about the collaboration internationally. What have been done on that? for the international countries, you're starting to do the MOUs and with other countries, and also he's done a lot for the Thailand's perspective on the cybersecurity, which he'll share later. Okay, so back down to a whole picture of global perspective. We go down to Thailand's approach, and then let's talk about the financial sector or banking sector here as one of the most targeted sectors on the cyber risk here. So, Dr. Kitty, you've involved with all banks within Thai banking cert. And can you please illustrate the security postures within the banking sector and to identify and assess the amount of risk and probably impacts of the cyber attacks to banks?
Okay, thank you. What I see from adopting technology right now compared to before COVID, I do believe that adopting technology will change the lifestyle, user lifestyle.
Right.
Every technology that we adopt, we change the lifestyle for sure. And COVID is just the initial notice to us because technology changed rapidly recently. We can see a lot of new technology come out. And bank will adopt the technologies and will impact not only banking service, not only bank employees, but also impact the employees. And that create the gap because of the understanding of technology may be not the same. So that create the attack surface, the new attack surface every time you adopt technologies, including bank adopt a lot of technologies. COVID create like the new environment that people need to work remote. User need to do online shopping online. So we see a lot of cases from the new environment change, not only from employees but only not the customer as well. So that is the point that we need to prepare for that change. COVID is just the initial notice to us in adopting technology and fast from now.
Right. So how ready are banks? Actually, this question might come into the Bank of Thailand as the main regulator to all banks here in Thailand. But I'm going to ask the honorary gentleman here about the readiness on the cybersecurity of banks in Thailand.
Yeah, we do aware of this one, and we need to balance. Technology adoption is very critical to business, and also the awareness, the building the understanding how we're going to use the technologies. We need to share information and prepare our user or customer in order to use the technology. We can see, okay, now before that we have prompt pay, now we're going to have prompt bridge. All the user need to be educated before we launch the service. That I think we have the track for the education track for all the employee or the customer to prepare for it. That is very key.
So is it the same approach that you've seen, like maybe in the Southeast Asia, maybe Colin and Jerry can share? That's the same approach that you've seen for getting ready?
Yeah, so one of the first key things is really about the awareness, and I think that's important, right? Because adopting of new and emerging technology, that has to be the way forward. I think while one of the KPIs we talked about is we need to be scared, I think it's really recognizing that these threats are real, but let's not also then be so scared that we don't move forward, right? It's important that we continue moving forward, but having that awareness, both internally as we build it, but importantly also for the consumers. And we cannot always assume and expect that the consumers will know everything because things will move so fast that you have to, in a way, foolproof it. That assuming even if consumers may not be aware of the latest type of attacks, how can we protect them? So I think it's awareness on two fronts, enterprises, how to build with security by design, but yet how do we then educate the customers as well?
Yeah, so let's talk about the patterns of attack. Now we have the awareness, we have the big picture of the global perspective, and also what Thailand is trying to do. So the patterns of attacks, people want to know. How can they know that they're being targeted? Now, there are a lot of things talking about the phishing, and it's not phishing to get a fish, but you can share with the audience what phishing is, and also the ransomware to steal your data if you don't pay for the ransom. But if you pay for it, you might not get the data back anyway. So, Colin, maybe you can share what these are and the patterns of phishing and ransomware attacks, and any past incidents that you forefront liars have seen.
So for ransomware, or maybe let's start with phishing first. Maybe at phishing level, everyone knows, like when you actually receive an email, by an attacker, the attacker wants you to click on it, and download something, or if not, connect to some places on a website. So those are things that, phishing attack is all about. You really want to cast the net as wide as possible. They are hoping to get back some things. But then when you're talking about something that's more specific, we are talking about spear phishing. Spear phishing has an element of reconnaissance based, meaning that I will study the environment, I will know exactly who are the people in your organization, who do I need to reach out. It can be anyone in your HR department, or even in your finance department that I need to do POs, or HR when I actually send my resume. All these things are very targeted. That's what we call spear phishing. But as the whole evolution starts coming up, you will see things like smishing, SMS phishing. That's where you get SMS that's sent to your phone, and you click on it, and then it connects your phone.
Like you get free loans.
Yeah, for example, definitely. Yeah. And then you have another phishing, which is actually through voice phishing. This creates, using the element of people behind it, talking to you, so that creates the credibility. People will then think that, yeah, it's true, it's real. So those are areas that even phishing itself is also evolving. And I think there's another cousin part of this, where they are starting to use things like deepfake. What is deepfake? It's using AI to create something that's on voice, or if not images, that's convincing to tell you that, this is real, and that you will then be phished by the whole attack. So those are evolutions when we talk about phishing. Let's move off to ransomware, for example. Over the past 2 years, when we talk about ransomware used to be something that you drop into an environment, it encrypts your environment, it stops the operations. That's to actually get you to pay money, a ransom. But over the years, this has become an operation. It becomes a syndicate, running it. It's what we call ransomware as an attack. As a service, where you have operators behind it. And it becomes something that becomes an affiliate program even, meaning everyone specializes in every part of your attack lifecycle. Somebody is so good at, distributing, what we call a distribution cluster. They're trying to get their first foothold into the environment. Once they get in, it passes off to the next group, which is what we call the post-compromise cluster. They are really looking at how do I build the best malware, so a ransomware rather, so that they can steal information and also cash out on operations. So affiliate programs runs in a very specialized manner with a bit of commoditization at maybe the distribution cluster, but all the specialization and professionalism runs after post-compromise. So you use that as a program to actually extort. You steal things, and then you have a leverage in the environment to make sure that, whoever you are actually attacking will then pay you money. If not, they will end up doing what we call the shaming sites. They tend to take your information, publish it online, just to shame organizations. If not, they will threaten them to say that this is something we have picked up from the environment. Because that creates fear, right? That creates a level of uncertainty. And the shaming sites will also tell you things that, for example, like what the moderator was talking about earlier. When you picked up something and you say that I've got data, how do you know that this person really got your data? It's only when you can put part of the data set out and say these are things I got. You can verify it through your database and see if these really exist. Yep.
Yeah, now I start to get scared. So now you understand the patterns of attacks. You know that you can get it anytime. So a little bit back to you, Jerry, that based on the international practice framework like NIST, we know it, we need to do the identification, protection, detect and response, and at the end recover. But we don't want to go that far to the recovery part. So probably you can share with the audience the first three things that they need to do in order to protect themselves against what Colin has said.
Yeah, so there may be more than three things, and one of the
I get you just three, okay?
Okay,
People will
I'll try
forget
to-
after this.
I'll try to prioritize. One of it is really about taking a risk-based approach, right? And I think that's going to be very important because if you start looking at your overall landscape, there's going to be more things than the resources that you have available to protect all of them. So you first of all, you need to know what's going to hurt you the most. Because that's where, when the attackers come in, that's the one that's going to really get you bad, right? So taking a very risk-based approach into it is very important. While considering the risk, I think it's also important to make sure you look at dependencies. Don't just look at the entity that you are doing that risk assessment on. If I use an example of Colonial Pipeline, which was of May of last year, right? When you start looking at it, they shut down the whole pipeline. It was not because the OT part of the things was compromised. It was a billing system that was compromised. But because of that, they were not sure of two things. Number one, did it get into my OT environment? They didn't know. The second part is, even if I continue operations, how am I going to bill? I cannot bill because my billing system has gone down. So as a result, they had to shut down the pipeline, although that was not the part that was impacted. So look at dependencies when you're doing your risk assessments. NIST is always a very good starting point. And in fact, if you look at NIST, they have come up with NIST IR 8374, which is, they used it to do a ransomware risk management profile. So what they did was do a mapping to say, if you want to do a risk assessment for ransomware, this is a subset of the controls from NIST that you can consider using. So I think that's one of the very good starting points in there. And obviously we spoke about the awareness portions of it, because ultimately when you have a ransomware, it's always somebody that was a recipient of something malicious, not knowing about it and then executing it eventually. So I think those are probably the three key things in there.
So the first one was?
In terms of taking a risk-based approach,
Risk-based
remembering
approach,
your dependencies, NIST IR 8374 is a good checklist for you to start. And the third one is the user awareness.
Well, thank you so much, Jerry. So when you see a big picture, you understand the patterns, you have the awareness on. So back to our lead regulator here. What is your strategic direction or roadmap on the cybersecurity in Thailand?
Okay. In order to cope with this cyber issue, let me start with the big pictures. So what NCSA has done, we have proposed the National Cyber Policy and Plan 2023 to 2027, and the cabinet have been approved this plan in the August this year. The plan will set the direction to cope with every type of cyber issues. Besides the policy and plans, we also set up the minimum baseline and best practices for all sector, because the Cyber Act divides CAI and government organization into 7 sectors, and each sector has different level of cyber capabilities. That's why we set up the minimum baseline, because for the financial sector, the cyber capability is far above some other sectors, and they can apply this baseline or standards in order to deal with the cyber incident or cyber attacks. Besides of that, in addition to that, we also implement a lot of programs. For example, cyber awareness program, or maybe cyber resiliency program,
Right.
or maybe cyber clinics. If some organization has issue with cyber threats, that is what we done to deal with cyber attack.
So they can come and see you.
Yes, if
get
they
the
have any
com-
problem, they can call us with the, help desk or maybe online hotlines for NCSA.
Wow, very good. Now you can leave some number here that people can get to your hotline. Actually, he mentioned about the CII, which is the Critical Information Infrastructure, which NCSA has divided into, I believe, 7 sectors. Yes, and you said that you regulate all these sectors, which is like huge. It's a whole country. And what approach that you're using, because Bank of Thailand is one of the regulators, and what kind of approach that you can regulate to the whole thing of these 7 sectors?
Actually, we have the model because, as I mentioned earlier, each sector has different level of capabilities. So we set up the minimum standard and we set up the sub-regulator. For example, in financial sector, Bank of Thailand is the regulator for this sector. They can add up or top up the standard for that sector. And because of this, we encourage some of the sector to have their own regulator in order to propose the regulation that related to the level of cyber attack in that sector. So we delegate some of our power to subsector regulator.
Our pleasure to take that kind of roles and responsibilities to help protecting, especially the most targeted sector in finance. So I would like to back to Dr. Kitti about you're the first line of defense here, especially just like ants, right? Ants go where sugar is. So now all the money is with the banks. That's why all the cyber threats and threat actors are trying to attack you. According to your experiences, and probably other sectors would like to get from your experience, what would you give the advices to those sectors if they want to get started or learning from the banking sector experiences?
Okay, come. I would like to make it short. 4 things for me.
Perfect, thank you.
In order to cover the vigilance, our topics. The first thing is visibility. In order to manage the risk for customer, now we have multiple products, multiple control, and big environments. We need to have visibilities in order to understand what's happening, what's going on in the productions. The second thing is understandability. We need to understand from what we have from the visibility, from the data we have. Understandability is that the capability, important capabilities that we need to have. And the third thing is prioritizability. We need to prioritize things because we have data, we know what it is.
Right.
Maybe a lot of things need to do. We need to prioritize it. And then the last thing will be executability. 4 things that will help for all organizations, big or small. You can apply this as a practitioners. I see this is the key, four key things for everyone.
That's really interesting. I really like the visibility part because actually once you have the clear view on what's going on, you can be ready, right, and have the responsive approach for this. And any of the approach that you're doing, I heard that you're doing a lot of like cyber drills and cyber ranges with this industry as well.
Yeah, once we understand, we capture the gap, we have to practice. So this is the activities that TBC are doing every year. All banks, including regulators, or sometimes we invite other company, other organization that relate to the banking service to do the cyber drill. So that will identify the gap. It's not the very real exercise, but it's like a tabletop or some kind of exercise that we try to capture what is the gap that need to be improved. So that is the very important continuous doing those kind of exercise. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kitti. So we talked about the cyber threats in terms of phishing and ransomware. Actually, another most important attack is third-party risk, because we're not alone in the ecosystem. We're using a lot of service providers, and we're totally sometimes relying on the services. Like we got shut down, not really shut down. We got the disruption on one of the online collaborative platforms. I'm not going to name it for 6 hours for a whole global impact, which we didn't have much to do about it. We just had to wait. So the question comes into probably the first jury can share. If we're safe in our own house, but our neighbors might not be. But we totally rely on those neighbors. So what have you seen on the third-party cyber risk? What are some examples or impacts on that?
And I think third-party risk is definitely something that's been around for a very long time, right? And traditionally, there are some of those things where, like you mentioned, when we rely on another party to maybe say do marketing, do printing statements for us, that has been around for quite a while, and we have seen a lot of those things that still continue to have some problems. But I think that whole category around third parties has also expanded to cover quite a few other areas in the digital space as well. So take, for example, when we start looking at some of those ransomware attacks that has been happening over the years, they are not just going for individual companies, but they are going for software which is then used by a lot of other parties. So you may be using a third-party software to perform something. Kaseya last year was one of a very good example, right? Close to about 1,500 companies got affected just because one software was impacted, and then you get a ransom across so many different companies. The other area of third parties, which is increasingly a concern, is when we start doing a lot of what we call citizen development. Citizen development is more of like in-house, you develop your own apps and you rely on open source. To be clear, I'm supportive of open source, but it introduces problems in it. So Log4j was one example, not because of something malicious, but there were vulnerabilities in it. And you saw that the industry took a very long time to figure out, what their dependencies on either their own software or third-party software, the reliance on such a program in there. So I think as we start looking into all this, there are also shared platforms. You mentioned about platforms, and this really do extend out to quite a lot. In Indonesia, for example, a few months ago, there was this procurement website so it's all public information. The procurement website was compromised as well. So if you had submitted a bid onto that procurement environment, then those information would have been lost. Many years ago, if we remember the Panama Papers incident as well, it really highlights that you can do the best that you can. You can do a point-in-time snapshot and review of a vendor, but you have to accept that just like it's a matter of when, not if, for yourself, it's the same for them. So you got to take that into your risk profile as well as you are developing it, and then just make sure that whatever you give to them in order to get the things done is within your tolerance.
Well, thanks so much. So we talked about the third party, especially the big names. And sometimes we don't have really much influential power to do some of the requests. So probably I'll ask on the perspective of Thailand. So those big names are being used by a lot of companies, including Bank Thailand sometimes, and banking sector, financial sector, as a whole country. And any approach on attacking the third-party risk in this part?
Okay, based on NCSA statistics, even though we don't have any major software vendors, but we do have some kind of third-party attack in Thailand. From the statistics, we experience web hosting and cloud service providers. In case of web hostings, one of the web hosting companies, they have a lot of organizations that register as their customers, and because they do not implement the strong cyber security measures, so only one malicious script can damage all of their customer web page, and the data that's stored in it. Because of that, because they do not, implement, for example, some kind of OWASP top 10 security measures, and that become, one of the issue of third-party attack in Thailand based on our statistics.
Yeah, those are the standards, probably best practices that we set in place. But the most important thing is how to make sure that those third parties are doing the ways they're supposed to do, right? That's one of the questions that I always get from the committee when I report the incidents. But they don't really care about what happened, and they know that we did a great, response on it. But what's going on next? They don't want to see these incidents anymore. So any thoughts on this? Probably one of the.
Well, we might have to, enact some of the regulation for third party, but it will not happen in the near future, because if we need to enact some kind of regulator, we need some public hearings. We might need some incident that raise the awareness of the people and make the people aware that this regulation is mandatory or is necessary for third-party vendor in Thailand. Because of, we can use the awareness to solve the problem, but the awareness itself might not be fulfill the issues. The regulation might be the last and the most effective way, but we need some kind of awareness and consensus for the people.
Have to start step by steps, and then at the end you just swipe your ruler on for the regulations. So I would like to back. We are having about 10 minutes left on the measures that you would like to give to the organizations to improve cyber resiliency, probably after this past COVID for COVID. Colin, sorry.
So I think like what Dr. Kiki was talking about, the first thing for us, or at least for myself, is really on cyber tabletop exercise. The main thing is that security affects everyone in the organization. That's something we have to take away, and the leadership themselves have to be the one to endorse it, meaning that they take that as a serious problem. The only way to really run it through tabletop exercise is really to train what we call the muscle memory, to know what you need to do, when you are being attacked, okay? And to really think about cyber resiliency, the two different components around it, it's really around how do you detect it, what are your proactive things, and how do you react, Resiliency really revolves around how do you anticipate, withstand, adapt and evolve. These are all the kind of goals that we are trying to get at the end of the day. But with these two areas that we are thinking about, it is also important to really play it out. That's where tabletop exercise allow you to learn from all the attacks that's always happening in the cyber world, put it into your context and train it and see how people react. I think yesterday when I actually was going through one of the sophisticated attack on a banking system, those are things that really would happen. It is important to think of how that will play out in your own organization and use that as a scenario, as an inject, to train and to also see responses from different teams, because the response itself is not just a technical response. There is your comms, there's your PR, there's your legal. All these different groups are all involved in your cyber crisis communications. So those are important things that we need to think about if we want to be resilient.
Yeah, that's very, very good views, because we've done a lot in financial sector. We do it every year, and more than once in every year as well. We do what so-called CSIRP, the Cybersecurity Incidents and Response Program, and we engage all the stakeholders, banks, non-banks, to practice that as well, right? So the keyword comes to practice, practice, and practice. All right, so I'll get back to probably Jerry about the forward-looking, because now we're talking about the digital solutions. We adopt new business models, and those models gives convenience, but we're saying that we're not going to compromise security over the convenience, right? So any thoughts on this for the views that we can strike the right balance between innovation and cybersecurity?
In order to have the balance between innovation and security, I think one of the things that I have seen it improving over the years, but board level interactions, I think, has to continue. So it is definitely much better than a few years ago. But in order to have this balance, is where you see innovation is on the business side, right? And then you have the security coming from the risk management and the technology side. The two have to really come together and have a common language in understanding it. So quite a bit more work still needs to be done in that board level interactions to make sure, you know, a risk language is being spoken. It's not a 1 or 0 thing. We have to recognize that despite all the good things that we have done, hackers will always find ingenious ways of breaking the controls that we have. So what have we learned from it, and how are we going to do it better? So board level interactions is one of the things that I would like to point out. The second is I actually like the framework that Dr. Kitty was using in terms of having that visibility, understanding it, prioritizing, and then actioning on it. And as we start looking at it, which is where, you know, as we have a lot of transactions, the use of data and being able to analyze it quickly is going to be one of the key things that allows you to act a lot more quickly in it. So I would say, you know, that's probably the use of data is the other angle. And when we look at it, maybe just very quickly, one point I wanted to bring up is people used to always talk about insecurity. People used to always talk about the attacker's advantage. And they say that defenders are disadvantaged, right? Because I must protect everything. But once the attacker is inside your environment, the attacker actually has to be very careful not to make a mistake. So if we implement that framework of having visibility and understanding what's happening, you are able to find out when the hacker actually makes a mistake, and then you are able to pick it up a lot quicker in there. So I think it's really boiling down to, you know, that board level interaction, making better use of data to know what's happening in your environment to balance it.
That reminds me of one of the frameworks, so-called zero trust. You never trust anyone, you always verify and you assume breached in every time. So that's going to be one of the good approach. And when the security comes in place, we always get priority for security. And the question comes in that how much enough is enough to put, you know, all your walls up to get the security. The board may say, oh, is it the same one that you requested 2 months ago? Because it sounds so similar. But we're saying that, okay, attacks get advanced and, you know, all the protection needs to go forward as well. So probably we'll talk to a banker here because they usually spend their money really wisely. How much is enough for you to put in the security part?
Thank you. Very hard question.
That's why I'm talking to a banker.
Let me touch on the global issue first. Yeah. This year, World Economic Forum talking about digital inequalities. That boil down into if we have the overall global issue, if we have the digital inequalities, it's going to create the bigger gap between provider, which is bank, and also consumer or users. World Economic Forum say that digital inequalities create the cyber vulnerability.
Okay.
That's very true. And that vulnerability become big and bigger every year. In order to invest into the overall ecosystem, bank invest in technology, invest on our people, and as I said, we need to invest on some tool or some programs that help customer aware or understand what technology we're going to use. And in order to measure the effectiveness of our investment, we need to monitor, we need to observe. I think social media is a good tool for us to monitor the response from communities, from society, that people still say something that it seems like they don't really understand what we are doing. We need to invest more on that part because of we may not, there's an imbalance in some point.
Yeah.
that is we need to keep monitor and sense the information from social media, for example. It's very good to measure where is enough or not enough.
Okay.
And that will show to management to see now people talking about the new technology this way. That changed from last year. So that will be the process that we need to
Yeah.
work on. Yeah.
Yeah, because probably there are different sizes of companies and different level of risks. So, and it comes to the probably level of risk appetite for each of the company as well, right? So, for example, for banks might be really high and you have to put up all the securities in place. So probably come back to the very last word because we have less than 1 minute left, but I want to go back to Major General about what have you done for Thailand to get ready for this? And especially we talk about people, process, and technology so far as the main causes of risk. So probably how to mitigate those risks and to attack that.
Well, the other component that as important as technology is humans. I mean, during the past year, NCSA put a lot of efforts for building the human capabilities. Last year, we implement one of the major program called Intensive Cyber Security Capability Buildings. We educate about 4,000 people from governments, public and private sector, as well as ordinary people. And more than 1,500 were selected to take international cyber certifications. For example, CompTIA Pentest, CompTIA CISA, as well as one of the most distinguished certification, CISSP. And we can say that this program, we add up about more than 40 people who can pass CISSP certifications. And I am glad that the first one who passed this certification come from Bangkok, Thailand.
All right, good job. Thank you. But still not enough, 40 people for a whole country. So how many times do you have to keep doing it over and over?
Before this program, we have 284.
Okay.
Yeah.
But still, we need like 100,000.
Oh, as far as I know, Singapore has about 1,000.
Okay.
Yeah, 1,000 something.
Yeah, but Singapore is much smaller. But anyways, we can talk about it, go on and on. All right, for the key takeaway for the audience, 1 minute each, please. We'll start with you.
Me?
Yes.
Okay. So I think one of the important things as we start looking at this is that we must remember that cyber criminals are eventually after certain gains, right? These gains can be financial gains, intelligence, IP. And in order to get that, they are hacking the human. It just happens that, the data is digital, it's in some technology, and the human have access to those technology. That's why there seems to be this obsession that cybersecurity is a technology problem. It's not just a technology problem because cyber criminals are coming after you. So it's very important to bear that in mind because things have changed over the years. It's no longer about people attacking organizations and IT systems. It's people, hackers attacking people. So I think that's really one of the key takeaways that times have really changed.
Thank you so much. Back to you, Dr. Kitty. ค่ะ
ครับ I think now a difficult time because of the rapid change. We see a lot of change maybe every month and security improve in both directions. Adversaries and also defenders. Defenders us learn from threat actors.
Right.
Threat actor learn from us. So it's the cycle, it's a period of learning. It's a matter of how fast you are. So the key takeaway I would like to, I love this Chinese proverb. They say that when the wind of change blow, someone build wall, other build windmill. That's the last word. Thank you. It depends on how you see the problems.
Thank you so much. Jerry?
So I would say that, embrace new technologies. I think anything that is emerging, I think that's fine.
Very
You know, all we need is really to think about what is our own risk profile. You know, what are we trying to address? Because wrapping together what Dr. Kiki and Jerry just mentioned, you know, it's really around how do we see the attack surface, understand which part of it affects us. Do we need to prioritize that first? You know, so one of the key things that we probably need to think about is cyber intelligence. It needs to enable, empower us to think how to actually address threat actors out there. You know, the learning is really understanding attackers. We take that learning into that whole understanding and then build that into your resilience program, build that into your cybersecurity risk, or maybe into your incident response plans. So those are areas that we have to constantly evolve, breathe and live that, so that don't be complacent in a way. Do not let, you know, whatever that is there, SOPs or your playbooks, be static. It has to be something that you're constantly learning, improve it. Learn, improve. So there is always a continuous improvement process, even if we think about ITU, for example, IT service management. That's for that spirit that we need to think about.
Thank you so much, Colin. Last word for you,
Okay.
Major General.
Thank you. I see cyber issue has some similarity as COVID or other pandemic disease because especially in the digital era, you cannot completely avoid it or prevent it. You have to understand it. You have to live with it because it will become new normal way of your life.
Well, thank you so much, gentlemen. For my last word, back to the theme of the events here, that we have to collaborate because we built one of the platforms like this, and we do the threat intelligence to share information. We build a stronger community, and we innovate because, as Dr. Kitty said, advisory and the defender has to go along together with the business models, and at the end we inspire. So hopefully that our experiences today can actually have some of fruits of thoughts for any organizations or any persons that are participating in our session. Please give a big round of applause to these distinguished gentlemen here that we have. Thank you so much.
Thank you.